Hi everyone, this is Mari Craig, and you're listening to the Small Steps to Wellness show, a podcast where we discuss how we can achieve more wellness in our lives one small step at a time. For the past 6 odd years, I've taken a special interest in nutrition and I've changed the diet of my family on its head. But as I've dived deeper into the world of nutrition, I have learned that health is so much more than just what we put on our plate. This is why on this podcast we will be talking nutrition, mental health, being in alignment, holistic health care, self care, raising children, and more. We will also be hearing stories of women's journeys to overcome trauma and what it has taught them on the way. When we share our stories, we realize we are not alone and that things can change for the better. I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey as I explore what health and wellness truly encompass. If you like what you're hearing, please consider rating the show with a 5-star rating and sharing it with your friends. It really makes a big difference. Now, on with today's show.
Hello and welcome to the Small Steps to Wellness show with me, your host, Mari Craig, where we are discussing how we can achieve more wellness in our lives, one small step at a time. A while ago, I sat on a call with some of my colleagues and we started talking about how it is so difficult these days to make the right choices. I don't know if any of you have seen the fantastic show, I think it's fantastic anyway, The Good Place, where Kristen Bell's character, I think it is, realizes, oh my goodness, it is impossible to get into the good place because no matter what we do, somewhere down the line, it leads to something bad happening. And it speaks to me quite a bit because I find it so hard to make the right choices when it comes to food. And we sat discussing it from different points of view. And so I've got with me today a few of my colleagues. We all work together. We're all affiliated with the Juice Plus company. That's how we know each other. And we're just going to have a little chat about our challenges because we come from different places, and maybe also share some advice based on our own experiences, what we've found to be working, in the hope that it will make the jungle that is nutrition advice and the jungle that is actually cooking healthy food for your children and for yourself a bit easier. So first of all, with me today, I have Vicky Ash. She's a mum, a wife, and a winemaker, which I always think sounds so cool. And she's striving to be fit, healthy, and happy, and also helping others to do the same. Then I have Debbie Best with me. She's a registered nutritional therapist and she has a passion for brain health and keeping good nutrition simple as we age. This is a biggie. I've got Amy Dyson with me. She's a mum of 3 and a reflexologist. She has a passion for helping her clients adopt a holistic approach to their health. And she has a special interest based on experience in gut health and allergies and intolerances. And my background is a very new mum of 3, studying culinary medicine, and I've got a big interest in making changes to our lifestyle as simple as possible. So there we go. We are going to start off, I think, with just talking a little bit about what food additives are, because this is how our discussion started, because we were talking about how everything has got stuff added to it and it is impossible to know what's good and what's not, and some additives are good, some are not. So I wonder, Debbie, if you could maybe talk us through, like, what are food additives, why do we need them, and do you have any examples? And welcome to the show, by the way.
Thanks, Mari. Hi, everybody. So, oh goodness me, this is a real minefield. So hopefully we'll sort of touch at least the surface of it today. But food additives really can be natural. They can be very much chemically made and man-made. But essentially, food additives are anything really that improves the taste, texture, freshness, and appearance of food. Now, the big giant food manufacturers have really got this well wrapped up because lots of food additives are there to enhance the taste and flavour, which can actually make foods quite addictive. and without you really knowing it, they really, you know, that's part of their sort of their brief, if you like, to make foods tasty so that they sell more and have big profits. So in the good old days, you know, years and years ago, the simple food additives to preserve foods was salt. You know, we used to cover our food in brine, pickle our foods in brine, and that was, you know, that was pretty safe. But obviously, as the years have gone on, we've added lots of chemicals, things like, you know, artificial sweeteners. I know we're going to touch on that in a bit. You know, colorings, tartrazine. You know, there's all these horrible colorings that can be added to food that can cause issues. You know, antioxidants actually help preserve the foods. You know, vitamin E is a natural one. Sulfur dioxide. You know, there's a whole soup of things that can be added to food, and that's the problem. Yeah, so really just sort of improving the saleability of the food and the to keep it preserved, really.
And some of them, you were saying, are actually healthy additives, so it's also hard to know, I suppose, what to stay clear of and what to you know, what's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if I can ask you, Amy, because you come from a perspective of allergies, and that must be, you know, adding a whole different layer to the whole additives things. I mean, what have been your struggles as I guess because you've got your own intolerances, and then you've got children with allergies. So how is this? How, you know, what do you find tricky with food additives?
Hey Mari, thank you for inviting me onto the show. It's been a real learning curve for me the last 11 years. My eldest daughter is 11. I'm a mum of 3 kids, and I didn't really know anything about food additives before my children were born. I mean, I knew that there was this thing going around about being gluten-free and how that's supposed to be better for some people. And I did have IBS for about 10 years before my first daughter was born. So I did have an upset tummy most of the time, but I never quite put 2 and 2 together. And I never really connected the dots that maybe something that I was eating or an ingredient or multiple ingredients that I was eating might be contributing to the state of affairs with my bowel movements and my gut. And so it was really only until my eldest had this quite severe reaction to cashew nuts at the age of about 16 months that I was like, ooh, you know, that it really kind of hit home how either harmful or powerful, I guess, foods and ingredients can be. So then I was, you know, constantly scrutinizing food labels, make sure there's no nuts, because we had to take her to the doctors and get her checked over. And it turns out she was allergic to all of the tree nuts. So then being really careful, looking at everything, making sure everybody knew that was looking after her. Don't give her any pesto that's in a jar, because that's actually got cashew nuts in, you know, things that I hadn't even realized as a parent because I never looked at ingredients. So then when baby number 2 came along 3 years later, I was like always looking at ingredients anyway. I tried to stay away from nuts just generally in the house and while I was pregnant, because I thought, well, maybe, you know, I've passed it on somehow. You know, you ask all these sorts of questions. But when baby 2 was born, I was not ready for what was going to happen, because although she appeared to be quite a healthy baby when she was born, she developed this awful eczema. And I know babies get little bumps and red spots on their faces when they're born, you know, they're coming into the world. But this was really bad. And I thought, this is unusual. My first child didn't have this, like, what's going on? And then she'd be having really nasty nappy kind of, you know, number 2s. They were quite green, and I was like, gosh, this isn't what happened with my first. And, you know, it's a whole new world out there when things change and you've got, you know, the next child and this didn't happen. So I was like, what's going on? And lots of people said, well, maybe it's something that you're eating, Amy, because if you're breastfeeding, everything that you eat is being passed on. And I kind of did know that, but I hadn't figured out, you know, exactly what it could be. And I thought, oh gosh, maybe it is something. And then I was like, oh gosh, maybe she's got an allergy like her big sister, you know, let's go down that route. So I think it was the day that she'd just had a feed and I'd eaten some mayonnaise with some fish fingers or something like that just before I'd fed her, and she went white as a sheet and then promptly threw up everywhere. She was quite a vomity child, but this one was just projectile. And I thought, okay, that must have been something I've literally just eaten. It's got, you know, got to find the connection there. So I contacted the GP. I said, I want my child to have an allergy check, please. Her big sister has got allergies, so can she get referred? Luckily, she did get referred quite quickly. It turns out she did have an egg allergy, but also dairy and soya and coconut and peanuts, but not the tree nuts, interestingly. And that was like a big whoa, because what that meant was I had to scrutinize the ingredients even more. And then it also meant that I couldn't eat any of those things because she would react. So it was a massive, big roller coaster of, right, got to check this, you know, when she's at nursery, make sure that they know she can't have that. And at the time, I just felt totally overwhelmed and thought, oh my God, this is a nightmare. Please let her grow out of it. But what it did was it helped me kind of understand more about ingredients of food. And I know this is what the topic of conversation is, but it helped me, or it really opened my eyes to what was in foods, because I had to literally check everything, because soya especially is found in many foods that you wouldn't expect, and even cow's milk as well. I think I can't remember what it was, but I remember looking and going, why is cow's milk in there? That doesn't make any sense. So having that experience has really helped me in a way. I kind of see it as a blessing. And I think, trying to think, the way it's helped my daughter as well, because as soon as she stopped eating those foods, her eczema completely cleared up.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of highlighted to me that was what it was that was causing the situation. And then her bowel movements got so much better.
And as a parent, that is a biggie, isn't it?
Oh my goodness.
When your child poos not properly.
And then it's very clear actually if she were to have something by accident, because she'd quite quickly come up in either hives or, you know, the eczema would flare up again.
But this is really interesting, because yes, not in food additives as such, but what the challenge you will then be having is that if you go to all the free from products, and we'll go, let's have a chat about that in a bit as well. All the free from products that are good for allergy sufferers, they might also be full of some of the nasty additives that Debbie was mentioning earlier. So it is tricky to know what to do then. You know, how do we get into the good place, as it were? Vicky, you come from a bit of a different, well, not quite different as such, but you said something about one of your children reacting to certain foods. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that's interesting as well.
Yeah, hi Mary. Thank you very much for inviting me onto the show.
We'll talk about wine next time, yeah?
Yeah. So my eldest boy, who's now 8, he also was born with a nut allergy, and has eczema. So he's quite sensitive. He is growing out of his nut allergy. He's becoming less sensitive to them, which is great. But Bertie, he will always react if we always try and have organic food for the children, for us, as much as possible. I think thinking back to when that first baby's born and you just have this perfect tiny being and you just don't want anything bad to touch them, do you? I remember feeling like I just wanted to sort of bathe him in mineral water, you know, not let anything get to them. Yeah. Especially when their skin is sensitive as well. So Bertie was probably about 5 when he first had a nectarine that he'd seen in a shop with his dad and said, I want one. So Daddy bought it. He eats the nectarine, comes home, and he has a rash all over his face. Yeah, never seen with any organic stone fruit that he's eaten. A couple of years later, the same incident happened again, except with a peach. Exactly the same thing, but this time even worse. He'd actually eaten this at school because some fruit was brought in to the classroom, and I got a phone call to say that Bertie couldn't breathe very well, and I had to go and collect him from school. Now, Bertie, he doesn't have asthma. However, in the winter, if he gets a bad chest, he has an inhaler just to help him, because he used to get rushed into hospital over the years with croup. And anything that went on his chest really affected him. So we do have an inhaler at home for through the winter. And yeah, he'd eaten this non-organic peach and found that he actually couldn't breathe very well, and I had to take him home. So it's quite scary to think about the pesticides and the sprays that are going on the fruit. And also we're talking about additives and checking labels, and of course with fresh fruit we can't check what's actually been sprayed onto those fruits and vegetables. And also, as a winemaker, I've obviously I know a little bit about the chemicals that are used for fruit, and I know, for example, that when we would take grapes into the winery, a product called switch can be used, but only 20 days before picking the grapes, because it's not a very nice chemical. And then, of course, once the grapes are picked and brought into the winery, it then undergoes an alcoholic fermentation, which will kill off most things. Now, that same product, that same chemical, can be sprayed onto strawberries within 24 hours, non-organic strawberries, of course, within 24 hours of them being picked. And they're then going to supermarkets and being bought, you know. It's horrific to think what is being sprayed and put over our fresh fruits and vegetables.
This is I mean, it's heavy to hear, because the amount of strawberries I've bought that are non-organic, I mean, and we know all these things, really, that it's one of the dirty dozens or whatever, isn't it, that strawberries really aren't great unless they're organic. But where do we even begin? I mean, this is where I'd like to get all of your inputs. I mean, where do we even begin? Because what's added onto our food can be positive, but it can also cause massive problems. Now, I think the reason why a lot of us probably, or you know, correct me if I'm wrong, and I love all of your inputs here, but it can probably feel a bit overwhelming for a lot of us, me included, to know where do I even begin, so you don't begin. And I think also knowledge, we don't really even know what half of these things mean. I want to get onto the artificial sweeteners as well, because we've been told that sugar is bad, which, yes, we can agree that we shouldn't have too much sugar, but then the alternative artificial sweetener, what does that do? And so I think there's a combination, isn't there, of maybe I don't care, I don't know, and I'm overwhelmed. What are your thoughts on that? Just shout if you want to go first. Debbie, yeah.
It's really, I mean, it's lovely to hear that the girls' stories. I mean, I think we all come from a personal place of experiences. I mean, my son is lactose intolerant. He's 25 now. When he was a baby, you know, he developed a dairy allergy, and that caused me to become very much more interested in nutrition. But I think the problem is with our experiences with children today is, you know, it's quite easy, maybe if you know you're a busy mum, you're out, you know, to quieten children with I use the term treat loosely, because it's interesting that we give our kids treats, or even ourselves, things that are not particularly good for us, you know, like biscuits, cakes, sweets, etc., that are full of either additives or high levels of sugar, and then that can, you know, they taste nice, but then that can have a huge impact on the child. You know, it can cause hyperactivity, etc., and really unbalance things like the gut, for instance. So it's, I mean, in my day, you know, we didn't even have biscuits in the house, because one, I can't control myself around a biscuit, but
I hear you.
So I do have sugar handling issues myself, I know. So yeah, so we never used to have biscuits, and you know, I used to try and cook things from scratch so that I knew what was going into my food. And I know in our fast-paced, busy lives, that's difficult for a lot of parents. Or I'm not saying a lot of parents, it's not that they don't care, but it's just finding something that's easy. So that, I think that's the sort of the issues that a lot of parents have. They want to give their kids a treat, but I think what I try and educate is that to try and use much more natural things, you know, go back to home baking, and so at least you know what is going in the food, because you're putting it in the food, you know, so you're choosing, you know, 1 or 2, 3 or 4 ingredients that you know exactly what's going in. So but I mean, I don't know whether you want me to touch on artificial sweeteners now, but
let's go into that a bit later, because I just wanted to ask Vicky and Amy, and now I'm in the same group as well as Amy, of having 3 children. And by the way, Vicky, I hear what you say about when they're born, you don't want anything touching them. And my son has just had a whole round of antibiotics, and I'm just crying on the inside, but there's poor tummy bugs that are no more. And I hear you. It's so tricky, isn't it? But how do you find this whole, what I'm talking about, with overwhelm, with knowledge, with do I even care? You know, how does that work in your lives? Because you got 2 children, Vicky, you got 3, Amy, right? And time is an issue, isn't it? And a lot of mums and dads that I speak to, or most really, at least one, if not both, have a full-time job. So how do you fit it all in? Like Debbie said, you want to do something that's healthy for your children, but time and knowledge, and actually something that they'll eat.
Yeah, so really just being as prepared as possible, trying to do meal plans for the week, and just cooking from scratch whenever possible, trying to cook larger batches of meals and freeze them. My 8-year-old's incredibly fussy still, so there's certain meals where I can do like huge batches of hidden veg sauce that he'll have over pasta or on top of a homemade pizza base, and that's just stuff that I can freeze, and so it makes things easier. But when it comes to treats, as Debbie was saying, you know, I'm finding this more and more difficult the older they get, because you start to have less and less control really over what they eat and what's in their vision. You know, they want to go to the local shop like their friends do, and there's nothing in there that I actually want them to eat, but you have to really allow them some leeway to have some treats. And then, you know, I'm in exactly the same position. Which is better? Is it better for them to have the chocolate? Is it better for them to have the crisps? And you're still grasping on things and looking at all these different ingredients, and it's really hard. It's really difficult decisions to make.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And actually, we'll touch upon the artificial sweetness in a bit, because the whole fruit juices thing, that's a whole other thing. But Amy, you have a bit of a different story with baby number 3, because you had all these allergies with your first 2, right? And then the 3rd baby comes along. So what's changed there? And I want to, and just before you answer, this is kind of where, you know, this could all be like a doom and gloom podcast recording where we go, oh, this is so hard, this is hard to find all the solutions, and I don't know what to do. But actually, what you're about to share, I think, shows that, you know, by making small changes, you can actually make a difference, right?
Yeah, I felt by the end of what I just said earlier, I was like, gosh, that sounds really negative, doesn't it? It was really quite a dark time when both of my kids were little, because I was just constantly overwhelmed by all the ingredients that were in everything. But there is a happy ending. And I have to say, on a personal level, because I had to cut out so many things when I was breastfeeding with number 2, I noticed that my IBS symptoms reduced. And it was really interesting, because I suddenly discovered, after I stopped breastfeeding and then reintroduced dairy into my diet, that my own IBS suddenly came back. So the symptoms, it was very clear, was that I was lactose intolerant, and in fact dairy intolerant. I can't handle any dairy. I've, you know, tried different levels. So to me, it was actually a blessing for me, because I learned how my body reacts to certain things, and it's helped me with food diaries and things like that to work out, especially with free from stuff, which maybe Debbie will touch on later, with certain ingredients in there. But I've noticed that the more I pay attention to what I'm eating, the more I notice when my tummy's happy. And as a result of that, by the time baby number 3 was conceived, my diet, in the sense of what nutrition, how much better nutrition I was, you know, how much I was nourishing my body, it really impacted on the health of my 3rd baby. Because I was very aware of what I was putting in my body. I was really considering the additives, having learnt, and what you mentioned earlier more about, you know, knowledge is power. If you know that there are certain things that you should avoid, and you can, and you're in a position to avoid them, and you make the decision to do that, it really does make a difference, not only to yourself, but if you're pregnant, or, you know, you're feeding your children as well, you know that it is making that difference. So by the time baby number 3 came along, I was really worried that he'd have all of these allergies, as if it was like a genetic thing. And this is a whole different topic, but I do believe that my own gut health influenced my first two's gut health. So by the time baby number 3 came along, we just had to really monitor how his skin was. He didn't have any eczema, so I was like, okay, that's good. His nappies were fine, everything was going okay that way. And then when I was breastfeeding, but I wasn't having any dairy, so I didn't know whether he'd have an allergy to that, so he wasn't experiencing that until he was starting to wean onto solids. And then I noticed a change when he started to have some dairy, and although it wasn't an allergy, it turns out that he is intolerant to dairy, but only at a very basic level. As he's grown, he's now 5, he can tolerate it in very small amounts. So there's a very clear difference between his health and his gut health, and his sister's from being a baby. And to me, the biggest factor that's changed is my own nutritional health and having that knowledge. And it's about going back to how I manage the whole treat issue with the kids, because now my older 2 are 10 and 8. They know what food's out there. They know which food tastes amazing. You know, when they go to parties, their eyes literally just open up like, wow, it's time for the sweets.
I see Vicky laughing, because I'm just sure she recognises that too. I recognise that as well, yeah.
Because we don't have them in the house. But what I was going to say is, it is about balance. And in my own personal experience as a parent, if the more you say you can't have this, you can't have this, the more they want it. So for us, we don't completely cut it all out. We do let them have those kinds of foods at parties, you know, birthdays, and then, you know, on the weekend we'll be a bit more relaxed, you know, might have a movie night with some popcorn, and, you know, maybe get a little bit of chocolate here and there, that kind of stuff. So, you know, they don't feel like they're missing out. But then on top of that, rather than you can't have it, it's bad for you, the language that we try to use around it is trying to educate them, you know, and explain why it's not a good idea to have this every single day. You know, anything every single day, if you have it every day, it's probably not good for you. And a prime example is when I went into, I think it was a Sainsbury's cafe, and I ordered a kids meal, and it came with this little green apple juice carton. And I remember thinking, oh, let me just quickly look at the ingredients, as you do, not thinking, you know, there's not going to be any milk in there or anything. Let me just have a look. And I was like, hang on, apple juice, and why does it have sucralose? Hang on, what's sucralose? Isn't that a sweetener? Isn't apple juice sweet enough? And I was like, oh, and I tasted it before I gave it to my daughter, who it was for, and I was like, ah, it was so sweet. And to, you know, my taste buds were like, what? That does not need to be in there. So I'm sure Debbie will have her thoughts on this, but it really kind of highlighted to me what's going on with all these additives. And so I explained to my daughter, this apple juice tastes really, really sweet, and if you don't like it, you don't have to have it. In fact, I'd rather you didn't have it, but, you know, you can choose. So yeah, that was something that I wanted to make sure I included, because it really baffled me as to why it felt it needed to add a sweetener to something that's already naturally sweet.
Yeah, no, I had the same experience the other day with the brand. I can't remember the name of the brand anymore, but it's incredible how apples need to be made even sweeter. What's the problem then with artificial sweetness, Debbie? And how that's another jungle, isn't it? Because this is again how this whole conversation started before we decided to record our conversation, was that we were like, wow, what is this, all of it, and how am I supposed to know, and what am I supposed to do? And so what's the issue with artificial sweetness? Because sugar is bad for us.
Well, I think the thing is, you know, sugar is it's bad for us in the quantities that we tend to take it in. It's not bad per se, to be fair. I'd rather have a bit of sugar in my food rather than a sweetener any day. In fact, my story with sweeteners started when I was in my teens. I grew up with tea and 2 sugars. That's goodness knows why, but that's what my mum used to give us all as kids. And I think, you know, as I was getting into my late teens, I wanted to reduce the amount of sugar that I was having. So I switched to SweeteX sweeteners, which are saccharin. And it took me, I mean, obviously, because I didn't really realise what was going on, being only 16 or so. But it took me a good while to figure out that these sweeteners were giving me really bad headaches. So that's where it started, really. So I then went cold turkey, decided, right, enough's enough. I stopped taking the sweeteners, had no sugar. So now, ever since sort of the age of 18, I've been, tea, no sugar, absolutely fine. And I think what happens is you do get, I weaned myself off. And I think that's the thing. It is all about moderation. Everything in our diet is about moderation. And it's lovely to hear that Amy still lets her kids have treats, or she at least explains the sort of the benefits or the cons of having certain types of food, which is really good. It is all about education. But the thing about sweeteners that unfortunately, they are absolutely everywhere in many, many processed foods. And what I do educate my clients is that you really do need to become an avid label reader. If it's got a sweetener in it, I really do advise them to avoid. And there's a sulfame K, there's aspartame. They come from a similar camp. There's sucralose. There's and then there's some of the natural stuff we'll touch on in a bit. But the thing with aspartame is that it is in a lot of foods, it's mixed with other sweeteners as well. The reason why they use them is it's cheap, it's very, very sweet. So it all comes down to cost as well. But the problem that I find with sweeteners, and this is also stemmed from when my child was tiny. I was looking for a fruit drink or some sort of drink other than water to allow him to have as a treat, if you like. But I used to spend hours in Tesco's just looking at all the fruit shoots. So actually fruit shoots weren't available then, but looking at like the Robinson's barley water, Ribenas, those types of drinks, and they all pretty much had sweeteners in. I think at the time, because I looked at this yesterday, at the time, Ribena, the ordinary one, not the tooth kind, but the Ribena one, it didn't have sweeteners in. It was just sugar.
That's new. That's
right.
New,
So,
yeah.
But now the ordinary Ribena has sweeteners in. Why?
Because it's cheaper.
Exactly. And so why are they so nasty? There's a couple of reasons why. One is that obviously it's a chemical. The body really has trouble recognizing the chemicals. It's not so much the chemical itself, but when the body metabolizes it. So when it metabolizes aspartame, it gets broken down into its sort of constituent parts. There's phenylalanine, which is an amino acid. There's aspartic acid, which is also an amino acid, and there's methanol in there. So when they get broken down, they then become like a free form, and phenylalanine and aspartic acid, they are in foods as natural, but they're normally bound with something like fiber, and they're all wrapped up in a natural package, which is fine. But when they come in a chemical form that's not natural, and the body breaks it down, then there is a lot more available in the bloodstream that can cause issues, particularly with the brain. So it can actually cause what's called excitatory toxicity. So it can actually overstimulate the brain to the point that it will actually kill some of the neurons. And our brains are very precious. We used to think that the neurons that we were born with were all we had, but we now know that we can make new neurons. So that's great. But we don't want to kill off our neurons, and we certainly don't want to kill off our brain cells in our children. And also as well, the methanol is actually quite toxic to the kidney, and when it gets metabolized, it also does form something called formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen. So in my view, why would we be putting these toxins into our body? There are safety issues out there for sure. There are. If you look at the data deeply enough, you will find some safety issues. So I always say that if you've got issues, especially children children in particular, I think should be protected from these sweeteners. But they cause headaches, they cause dizziness, they can cause seizures, and some people are much more sensitive than others. Some children are much more sensitive than others. But if you've got children that are either autistic, ADHD, those types of children that have got those types of issues, then you really do need to avoid them. So that's really the main thing. And of course, who knows whether they contribute to things like Alzheimer's in the latter stages. We don't know. That's the issue. But the fact that they do have such implications on brain health is what makes me want to avoid them. And then the other thing is, of course, they're put in diet drinks, or they were originally just put into diet drinks, because they don't tend to raise the blood glucose. But the problem is they can also still raise insulin, and people that have blood handling issues, people that are overweight, have insulin resistance, and that's part of the issue with sweeteners. And also as well, that the brain is very, very clever. So when you eat a sweetener, the tongue will taste it sweet. The brain will then be thinking, well, where's the calories? Where's the calories? Because it can't find. So what happens is the brain then is looking for more calories. So it then encourages you to overeat. There's been quite a few studies out there that have shown that it actually contributes to weight gain. So the things that they were put in diet foods to try and help, because it doesn't actually contain calories, can contribute to weight gain. So it's just sending out mixed messages. So I always say to people, look at the labels. Please become a very avid label reader. And actually, it doesn't matter what you're looking at, what food you're looking at, if there are that many chemicals on the label, don't eat it. Yeah,
it's exhausting though, isn't it, to know where to begin and where to end and what to do. And I mean, it's just it's just a minefield, isn't it? What's your take, Vicky, on artificial sweeteners and things like that? Do you let your children, what do you let your children have? Do you have a bit of a balance like Amy was talking about?
We keep well away from artificial sweeteners. And one of the main issues with my 8-year-old at the moment is all his friends are starting to drink fizzy drinks. So juice, you can find juices without artificial sweeteners, so that's okay. But when it comes to fizzy drinks, that's a completely different arena. I have luckily found some organic cola made with sugar, which he's now allowed like 1 can a weekend. And so he's happy with that. And like Amy and Debbie were saying, obviously education is key with the children, and it means that he is learning, and he might not like that he doesn't get to drink the Coke in the shop or the Fanta, but he loves the fact that he gets his special can at home, and at the same time he's learning what is good and what isn't good for his body.
Yeah, no, this is exactly it. I think education is key. I had the same conversation with my daughter when we were on holiday in Norway, because they are so obsessed with diet drinks there. And she asked me, what should I be having then? Should I be having the diet drinks, or should I be having the ones with all the sugar? Because neither is good for me. And we were just talking about it. I said, well, I would choose sugar for this reason, I said to her. But I also said to her, I would also choose to have an awful lot less. So if you have 1 can, I mean, now it's like every 3 months or something, because they're not that interested. But if you have 1 can, then I'd rather you have the sugar one than the non-sugar one, because also we don't know what the long-term implications are of all of these issues. Now, we need to wrap up because I've got a crying 5-week-old baby next door. But I wanted also so we've had some solutions. Cooking more from scratch, and also not giving ourselves such a hard time, learning to recognize some additives, especially artificial sweeteners. The last thing I wanted to touch upon was for those with allergies, or for those who think like, oh, I want to cut certain things out, there are issues with that as well. And we spoke about the additive Carrageenan, which is like hot off the press, apparently carcinogenic, and that's found in a lot of free from food, isn't it, Amy?
Yes, and this was the ingredient that was really bugging my tummy, because I had no idea what it was. I'd heard about this thing, in the kind of health forums, Carrageenan, it's not good for you, and if you have it every day. And then all of a sudden I was looking and would start spotting it in all the ingredients, because as you know, I would be scrutinizing all the ingredients, and I was like, oh my god, it's in the coconut milk, oh my god, it's in the free from cheese. Which one is it? The Applewood. I think it was the Sainsbury's free from that I was looking at, and I was like, oh my god. And I noticed that when I was eating it, I would have it with other foods that I knew I was okay with. And I was like, it must be something in there. And I did actually contact Debbie, because Debbie is the go-to when it comes to things like this. And she said, just check if there's Carrageenan in there. And sure enough, there was. And I then noticed I must have had something else that I hadn't checked the ingredients on for myself, and got this upset tummy a couple of hours later and was like, I wonder, let me go check that label. And sure enough, Carrageenan was in there. And I was like, for me, a food diary is amazing. If I can kind of track back on a daily basis, if I've had a bit of an upset tummy, you know, for anyone with IBS, you'll be well aware how tricky this is to monitor. But just to be really aware of such a tiny ingredient that can completely throw off your tummy, it's been a real lifesaver to me to learn how to read ingredients and understand the nutritional impact of these processed foods, because obviously if you are dairy free, you've got to try and find the alternatives. And to be honest, I'd rather just not have dairy free cheese unless I can find one that suits my tummy.
Yeah, this is interesting, isn't it? Because if we have we're trying to cut certain things out, but if what you replace it with is even worse, then I guess the answer is, as much as possible, what Vicky is saying is cook from scratch. And Debbie, you also like to promote things like our 10-day cleanses that we work a lot with, because it helps your body kind of have a bit of a reset, and it helps you, I guess, also notice, what do I react to? I wonder, ladies, thank you so much for your input on this. I wonder if we could put together a little list that we can put in the show notes of, for example, products for our children that we like to use if we are, you know, rushed for time, or if we can put together a list of some of the sweeteners and some of the additives that we try to look out for and try to avoid if at all possible, but also come up with a solution. Because, you know, sometimes it's hard to find. I mean, I've got a fussy eater as well, and I don't like to call her that because she started labeling herself as that, and that is not helpful. But I think sometimes it's just tricky to know what we can cook that A, they will eat, that B, doesn't take too much time if we haven't prepped, you know, and C, that actually is going to serve their health instead of be detrimental to it. So if we could do that, and we could put that in the show notes for anyone who's listening, that would be fantastic. Is there anything I've forgotten about? Anything else that, any advice you would give to anyone listening that goes, I don't know where to begin? Where would you begin, Vicky, to try to eat healthier?
Yeah, try and prepare your own food as much as possible. I think,
yeah,
you know, try and buy organic where possible, especially, you know, become familiar with the Dirty Dozen. Yeah, start following people on social media that are, you know, helpful in directing you and giving you better ideas for a healthy lifestyle.
Fantastic. What would you say, Amy?
This is something I say to my kids, which is who the two eldest are starting to read ingredients with me and looking at the fiber content and the sugar content. I say to them, if you can't pronounce it, it's very likely that it's artificial. And if you have never heard of it, if you're an adult and you don't recognize that ingredient, chances are your body won't recognize it either, and may well have difficulties digesting it or dealing with it.
Yeah. And I guess, Debbie, finally, if in doubt, ask a professional, hey?
I was going to say that if you really are unsure, it is always good to get some advice, and that's what I'd say is, you know, some of the programs that we run, you know, a lot of that advice comes for free, so you know, come and join us. But what I would say, just to give parents hope out there, so my son's 25 now, and he still drinks a ton of water over and above everything else, which is really great. You know, as he was growing up, I involved him within the cooking process. He loves and still cooks many of his meals from scratch. And I'm super proud of him when he phones up and says, Mum, how do I cook this? Because he wants to know and learn. And that just, to me, that feels like I've done my job properly as a mum. So all I would say is, you know, never give up, keep educating your children, keep involving them in food choices. And I think that will just really pay dividends.
Oh, I love that. I think on that note, I think we'll stop there, because I think that's perfect. We shouldn't give ourselves too much of a hard time, but also we do need, unfortunately, because I think to be fair, I'm not sure the food industry is really looking out for our health. So we need to be looking out for our health and helping each other. And I will ask you also, if you could share with me then if your Instagram handles, because I know all of you share some hacks that you do and advice, and kind of share a bit about your lifestyle, which I think would be really inspiring to those listening. So thank you so much. We shall put together a few notes for you all in the show notes here. If there's any questions at all, do get in touch with any of us. I'll put all our Instagram handles up. We are not perfect, but all means, I mean, goodness me, with a new baby, everyone looks up for the mummy now, right? So I have a ton of chocolates, and talking about sugar handling issues, it's all there, it's all available. Goodness me, there's been a bit of that's been eaten lately. So I hear you, but thank you so much, all of you, for joining in and for sharing some challenges and some solutions that you found. And hopefully this could be inspiring for other people who are on maybe a bit of a health journey, or don't know what's causing their upsets, or are just a bit baffled with what on earth should I be eating. So thank you so much to everyone, and thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Small Steps to Wellness show with Mari Craig. I am passionate about helping mums get their energy back through simple nutritional changes, because we know that if mummy is happy, the family's happy. If you would like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram under @smallstepstowellness, or visit my website smallstepstowellness.info. Speak to you soon.